So, very welcome to Morgonforum, the morning forum that is a part of the Forum for Civil Society Organization with Social Aims in Sweden. Very welcome also the viewers on the internet. We are webcasting this live, and from the day of tomorrow you will also be able to see this online on our webpage, morgonforum.se. Morgonforum.se. A couple of years ago, Forum decided to go to Great Britain to study voluntary work and volunteer organizations in the welfare system. There have been quite a few references to England and to the UK in the Swedish debate lately, and both politicians and companies and non-governmental organizations looking at England and seeing what can we copy from there and what could be interesting alternatives for Sweden. And so we went there to see how it works in practice. And one of the issues that we came across was the relation with money and how money can make social change and how money maybe not can make social change. And how can we use payments by results, or how is social results related to payments, and also what consequences does it have to make the otherwise costly social problems into possible profitable or a part of a market. We also had the opportunity to meet one of UK's most interesting NGO representatives or non-profit leaders, Cathy Evans from Children England, which is an umbrella organization for different child organizations. And you will tell us a bit more later. We decided that we would try to convince her to get to Sweden, and as you already know, she accepted. And we're very happy that she's here with us today to get more of you the opportunity to listen to her and to talk about this experiences that the different child organizations and the civil society in general has had with the payments by results and social impact bonds. And I think Cathy will also go through a bit more about what that actually is. And Cathy, I will soon hand over the microphone to you for about 20 to 30 minutes. And after that, we will have comments from Jansson, who is a commercial policy expert. Is that right? And a labor market economist at Almega, the employers organization for the Swedish service sector. And Susanna Alexius, who is a researcher of business administration at Stockholms University, and also responsible for the public sector management program at Stockholm School of Economics. With that, I just want to also have a quick introduction of the people in the audience. So if you could please raise your hand if you are today representing a non-profit organization. Thank you. If you're representing a company or a for-profit organization. Thank you. The public sector. Thank you. And a political party. And then the last question, I am a member of a non-profit organization or a non-governmental organization. That's most of you. Thank you very much, and I will give the floor to Cathy. Very welcome to Sweden, and a big applause.
Children England, as Anna said, is the membership body for children's charities in England. There are a lot of membership bodies for the voluntary sector in England, and there is a huge voluntary sector itself. So we were started in 1942 as an organisation, which was during the Second World War, and our purpose was to prepare with government for the creation of the welfare state when the war ended. So this was known, it was planned for, it was understood, and prior to that, the voluntary sector had been largely providing all of the children's homes, adoption, child protection, social work, and fostering in our country. And they had been campaigning for many, many years to say, we are committed to doing this, but the state must take over. This should be part of the state's relationship with children and not simply at the whim of charity. So in 2013, when I took over Children England, we, for the first time since 1942, we had no government money to support us as an organisation. I don't regret that. I'm quite happy not to have any money from our government. But we also feel that actually this is when the welfare state and the commitment to children is crumbling in our country. And it is very much at this point in time, the biggest dilemma for my members in the charity sector is how far do we plug the gap as the state commitment to children and families is pulling back? Is it the job of charities to step in and do what we can because people are in need? You may have seen how many children and families are using food banks because they can't afford to eat. This is the challenge, the ethical challenge for charities about its relationship with the state is very, very real at the moment. And it's both about campaigning to prevent the kind of policies which are hurting children and families, but also that very real ethical dilemma. Is it right to simply do whatever the state is leaving behind for us to do? Is it right to work with any and all programs that the state sets up, like the work program for the unemployed? So some of that's the context in the UK for everything I'm going to talk about, and for how we come to be so concerned about the marketplace and about some of the ways in which funding is being constructed for the voluntary sector, but also for the public sector. And I see that there's many from the public sector here. Payment by results and social impact bonds raise huge questions for the taxpayer, for the citizen, about whether these are the right ways to spend money. In some cases more so than they raise for the voluntary sector providing the service. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. So there is a lot of attention on payment by results as a mechanism. There's also quite a lot of hyperbole. Certainly some of our politicians make some very, very grand statements about how revolutionary payment by results or social impact bonds will be to the future state, to the modern state. But we need first to set those mechanisms in the context of what in our country has been over 30 years of making a market out of social interventions. So in the part of our sector that I know best, which is children's social care, we have been allocating resources and organising services to look after children through a competitive market for over 30 years. So instead of, as was the case when my organisation was founded, there were charities who had raised funds, who had buildings, who had assets of their own to look after children, and they would be in a relationship with the state. Money would change hands for sure, but they would be in a relationship with the state about when and with whom they were going to look after each child. Around the 1980s, we started to experiment with calling that a marketplace. And so instead of just knowing which charities are good at what and which ones have available space, they started saying, look, you guys compete for the prize of winning the business. And if you got the best ones will win and the worst ones will drop out. And that was experimental in the beginning, but it now is ubiquitous. That's what happens in every authority in England. If you have a service to offer children, you will be asked to compete for any money in order to make it happen. And however many organisations compete, only one will win. So if there are 5 organisations bidding to do the work, then only one will win. 4 walk away, having spent quite a bit of money and time on bidding, and then still having no services to offer at the end. So the theory of the marketplace, and this is just a straightforward buying and selling. The theory is that social care organisations have a product to sell, and it should, and if it's a good enough product, then it will sell. And that by this process, that makes all organisations focus on being the very best that they can be, and that the process of competition will weed out those who are worst, not good enough. The theory is also that that is the most efficient way for people to spend, for public bodies to spend their money. Not only will this weed out and prefer those of greatest quality, but it will drive down price. So nobody who's overcharging at kind of a luxurious rates will win these contracts because someone will compete at a better price. So that's also a part of the theoretical benefits of a marketplace. So there is an assumption that competition will perpetually move us towards better and better value for money in delivery of social care. Well, we've been doing it for 30 years, and I can tell you that there is no evidence that we're at a markedly better quality. And this is not to say that it's all poor quality. And there is no evidence of a giant leap in quality of service over 30 years. But perhaps most concerning, well, what has happened is that many charities have become very adept at tendering and delivering in a marketplace. So this is not a sorry story about charities. Many of them are extremely good, and they do deliver a good service. And they have very well polished business development teams who can put a tender in that will look more persuasive than anyone else's, even a small local organisation, because they have been practicing and practicing and practicing. So like many commercial markets, public service markets favour those who have done the most business already. So this is, this market model does work like a market in the respect that it tends to reward business success. So we do have several charities who have grown and grown and grown because they're very good at winning contracts and they deliver the contracts, and so they grow. So we have an increasingly polarised charity sector. We have some very large charities with where the public perception and actually a lot of public criticism now results from them being like a business. So they have very business-like ways. They have pricing for everything, very calibrated pricing. They have recruited people from the commercial sector to do their sales, to do their tendering. Their organisational structures look very commercial, and they succeed in a marketplace. The rest of the sector, and in my part of the sector in terms of children's services, there are 60,000 charities and voluntary groups. 60,000 in England. So 90% of them are small, local, and don't compete for these contracts at all. It's nothing to do with them. But there are 5 charities who compete for everything, are known everywhere, and who have been able to deal with the marketplace well. So it has polarised the charity sector, but not because we can't deliver good services, because we can. But it has changed our nature and our kind of character in many charities. One of the reasons why it has become such a roller coaster is because we're actually awarding contracts and reissuing contracts on a 1 to 2 year basis. So this has nothing to do with what you can change and deliver in 2 years. If you are constantly rebidding for your work, like on every year, then that's all you are doing. All you are doing is reselling yourself again. And in our context, you're usually reselling yourself at a cheaper price yet again, because you have to keep coming down. So there is an industry in the public sector and in the charity sector that is completely consumed with the business of competing, and which doesn't have the time, let alone the evidence, to say, did that last contract really work? Did children really benefit from the last contract, because it was only a year ago? So there are some rhetorical benefits which may be true about getting the right supplier, the right business for this work, but there's nothing that you can achieve in social care in a year sufficient to know that you should change management. So we are involved in what I call a downwards spiral of a merry-go-round. Every year, to do the same thing that you were doing the year before, you have to resell yourself, different price, recalibrate, maybe change management, but you also you change management, but you pick up the same staff who were doing the service before, because we have protection for employees. So you don't change staff, you just change management and then assume that that will change lives. And we don't have proof that that's true at all. So there is a problem with the market in the first place, but then when you have cuts of the scale that we are seeing in the UK, then the market comes to the brink of collapse. And so local authorities, who are the primary customers in most social care markets, have been cut by nearly 40%, the highest cuts of all of our government departments over the last 5 years. And we have to find out in the next month, but potentially another 40% cut in the next 5 years. Now, they are the customers. They are the paying customers in this market. If your customers have less and less money, this market has less and less future. So we have in children's and in adult social care many private companies who have been able to make profit and deliver contracts over 30 years. Just yesterday, it was announced that 50% of the companies providing social care for adults are about to go bust. That's because the customers have no money to spend. So there are many reasons to be worried about markets for social intervention in the first place, but if you've got financial strains, then don't even think about it. It's my advice. That's a road to nowhere, because there is no cost saving in doing a competitive marketplace. People spend money just to compete, but if there's not enough money on offer to do what you're being asked to do, this is a very dangerous spiral. So I wanted to talk about that context because we are so far down the road of competitive markets. 30 years, as I said, in many areas. And that is the context for payment by results and for social impact bonds. They are not separate or different. They are extensions of the idea that these are commercial transactions, that we are trading rather than helping, or that we are a gift economy. So first of all, I want to talk about payment by results, because payment by results is an extension of the marketplace. Competitive markets assume that just the act of competing will drive improvement. So we'll pick the best provider through competition. Payment by results takes that on a step further, and it says, once we've awarded the contract, then we will drive improvement by the way we pay you the money. So even after the competition to get the best provider, we will then withhold some of the money that you are due for this service. We won't pay you all of it until you have produced the results that we agree on. So the theory of payment by results is that the way in which you pay your money can actually drive improvement and achievement of better outcomes in social interventions. It's still a payment between two bodies. It's a relationship between two parties, the customer and the supplier. And some payment by results is about delaying payment of the cost. So in some cases, the provider will not get their full costs covered until 6 months or a year afterwards, after they've incurred that cost. In some cases, it's a reward. Now, in the best theoretical case of payment by results, you have all your costs paid, but you get a reward if you improve the outcomes. So the idea is this incentivizes even better performance. But in practice, and particularly in that very financially pressured context in the UK, we're actually seeing most payment by results being delayed payment of original cost, no profit. So the essential elements of any payment by results is financial incentive and evidence of outcomes. So in any discussion about payment by results, you will undoubtedly hear an awful lot of discussion about evidencing your impact. We must be focused on outcomes, and if you can prove the outcomes, then that's what we will pay for. And that's a very hard proposition to argue with. Everyone wants to be actually demonstrably changing the lives for the better of the people that we work with. So it has a sort of a general logic appeal, the idea that we should only pay when we know that you've done a good job. And our Secretary of State for Welfare and Pensions is a particularly passionate champion of payment by results. He gave a speech to the European Social Investment Forum, and he says, because we are paying by results, the government pays for what works, reducing the risk to the taxpayer, and the money follows the outcome. So providers are only awarded for the positive life changes we want to see. That's his belief. That's how, there is this very passionate belief in the UK that that payment by results and social impact and investment will revolutionise the way in which taxpayers' money is spent. No more spending on services that people just walk away from. No more spending on failed drug treatment. If it doesn't work, we won't pay. So it's got, as I said, it's got a particular political appeal, as well as a kind of a hokey logic, but it just doesn't add up. And I'll talk to you why. So we have 3 different areas of payment by results which we've experimented with. The first has actually been public sector payment by results. Nothing to do with the voluntary sector at all. There's been payment by results mechanisms between national and local government. So we have a Troubled Families Initiative, which offers financial rewards from central government to any local government that can meet the targets that have been set for a particular cohort of very troubled families. Now that has actually been really quite successful. It has driven some really important reforms in local government. However, I would have to say, I think it's doubtful that any of those local authorities who have done incredible work on reforming their practice would say that the very small rewards are what made it happen. The power of the Troubled Families Initiative is that it identified something which everyone agreed needed to change. So for local authorities that have grasped that, they are seeing much more reward from their own savings than they are getting from the payment by results. So it's very interesting as an incentive mechanism that Troubled Families Initiative looks to have been quite successful. And it is interesting in that relationship between national government and local government to have changed the relationship somewhat. It used to be national government gives local government money to spend and then complains that you're not spending it right. this changes it, and it says, look, here's your money. If you can achieve certain things, then you'll get more. And that is actually quite an important change for government spending relationships. They also tried to do something similar with children's centres, and children's centres are like community centres, but for families with children aged 0 to 5. And they tried a similar mechanism. They said, right, national government will give you financial rewards, local government, if you improve the outcomes from children's centres. And this was a disaster. It was completely abandoned. That's because a children's centre is an incredibly difficult service to measure the outcomes from. But the most interesting finding from the evaluation that preceded it being abandoned was what they hadn't understood was that money does not motivate good practice. And many of us in the voluntary sector could have said that. It might motivate managers, it might motivate company directors, but it doesn't motivate good practitioners with parents. So they didn't correspond to the idea that they should be driving performance. So I'm going to try and speed up a bit, because I know we've got a bit more time. Then we have supply chains payment by results, which I think you have something similar here, a work program, where you have a big company and then they have tiers, and sometimes the voluntary sector is involved at the bottom of a chain with incentives. And then we have practice delivery payment by results. And probably the most interesting of those, drug treatment, there have been 8 pilots of using payment by results to improve the outcomes from drug treatment. And that's been compared with 140 deliveries of the same treatment but with no payment by results. The quote from the evaluation is, "The introduction of payment for outcomes had a significant negative impact on successful treatment completion." So in all of the pilots, the ones with payment by results were seeing more people leave treatment incomplete, more people fail treatment and relapse than in 140 delivered without payment by results. So we have still yet to get underneath what that is about, but it is a salutary finding for those who are so enthusiastic about payment by results. So what's the problem with paying for good outcomes? Sounds sensible. What's the problem? Well, paying later may not be financially sustainable for many organisations. Being paid later is only something you can do if you've got cash flow and reserves, and you can take that risk. And for the voluntary sector, and particularly for the small voluntary sector, this is a risk that you can't contemplate. So this tends to entrench, again, the big organisations with big backup reserves who are already advantaged in a competitive marketplace. Secondly, and this is really important, the outcomes that are being measured for payment by results are very rarely real outcomes. They're not the outcomes that you really need for those people. And Robert Schlock has said you can measure outcomes, but to do it properly, you need randomized controls, you need a control group, and you need minimum of 18 months longitudinal study after you finish the program in order to know what outcome has been achieved, minimum. So nobody is actually evaluating real outcomes. What is happening is we're using proxies. Proxy outcomes are just process targets. We have Snowden in 2003 said, in complex systems, patterns emerge as a result of multiple interactions between agents. They are coherent in retrospect, but not in advance. So for example, we've had a massive reduction in people who smoke. And there are many, we can look back and analyse how were factors in that. There's been public education, there's been social change between generations, there's been smoking ban. We can look back and say this is a complex social change, but you couldn't have projected it 20 years ago and said we will attach targets to achieving this outcome to each of the players in achieving that. This isn't accurate. So the more important the performance measure, the less control you have over it. This is a finding from Mark Friedman. This is the paradox at the heart of doing performance well. If it's a real change, you're less likely in your own organisation to have been able to control for that happening. But you are being asked to take part in a payment regime which expects you to have complete control over it and says that this is a professional competence. This is a hiding to nothing, as they say. But all it does is to guarantee that what you're being asked, what you're actually doing is being paid for the production of data. Payment by results is the payment for data production that meets the description of a proxy for an outcome. And it inherently, all the research from America is that it inherently creates gaming, parking of cases, creaming off the people who will be easiest to meet the target, parking of people who will be too difficult and will damage your target. And we have many examples now in the UK of fraud, producing data that will help you to get your reward, even if it's not accurate and even if it's fraudulent. So we have many systems problems which are starting to come to light about payment by results. I'm going to close just by saying, I think for the voluntary sector, we are being distracted and drawn to this idea that commercial exchange is the model that we need to emulate, that we are trading in products and we need to be as business-like as possible. Now, I have no issue with commercial sector. We need it. There are many things that are best done and best developed and best sold by a commercial sector. I don't want a state haircut. I like to pick my provider and reward the one that I think is best. But nobody, if I want my house insulated, and I can see that there's evidence that that might save me money on my heating, I'm still not going to get a private sector insulator to come do my insulation and wait for payment until I've got my savings on my gas bill. That's not going to happen. The evidence loop is the same. The reason for doing it is evidenced. The benefits may come financially and environmentally, but it's not accurate and it's not fair to expect my insulation salesman to only be paid when I've got a reduced gas bill in 2 years' time. And that's what we're being asked to do in the voluntary sector. It doesn't add up. That isn't actually how the commercial world operates, and it's storing up bills and problems for the future while distracting our practice from the people that we are there to serve. So I'm going to leave it there, but I look forward to the discussions.
One of the reasons I think we need to discuss results in Sweden, whether we like it or not, is that the fact is that the state is changing very much in our eyes before us. If you look at migration, for instance, you can see it with the big flow of people coming here. The state does not follow their task that we are perhaps we have perhaps seen in the historical wise. And the cost is also rising very highly. And if you look at people who apply for asylum, there is now 15 months to get a decision, which is one side the state is not functioning the way it should be. And if you look at the labor market, it's the same thing. One of the programs in the labor agency for newly arrived migrants, only 6% of the participants enter regular labor market after 2 years. And if you combine all people who are leaving the program for either studies, jobs in the regular labor market or subsidized jobs, it still just accounts for 29% of the participants. The state is failing. And the third case is also this, that when you look at welfare expenditure in Sweden, we have never had so many resources now than ever. They have continued to grow. But still, when you look at people, especially in the disability movement, who I meet regularly, people still feel that what you get from the state is less than before. It's harder to get it.
For one thing that I would like to stress is that recruitment. Look at recruitment. Who is recruited to deal with these things? Because what we find is that a lot of controllers and a lot of experts in communication are recruited. And they're recruited on the basis of making things professional, making things, efficient. And that sounds great. We all want that. But what happens is that we have a phase, or the organization is represented in these issues by professionals, expertise that might not be very much connected to the core business or the core operations of the organization. So if it's an NGO, for instance, that is into social values, and it could be childcare, could be elderly care, anything. It could be that the person actually representing and trying to work on these tenders and so on is an expert on that, but not really into the business of the organization, the core operation. So I think it's very important to think about what I call hybridity, that you have one foot in each world, that you're able to understand both, for instance, the business incentives and the market logic and so on, but you don't lose, in this case, then the NGO perspective or the public organization perspective. So I would urge also to calculate and communicate the costs, the administration costs, on both sides, both by the funders and by those trying to actually get the money. So I would urge everyone to try and calculate and also communicate what does this cost, and then we can all have fruitful discussion about, is this reasonable? Does this produce reasonable results? So that's one thing. The other thing I would like to stress is the need for alternatives. So it's one thing to always criticize the system, right? The system in use is always bad. So we look back, we had a better system, we look to the future, and it's a better system. But we always find problems with what's now. So I would say that we need to cooperate more than compete. Or if we need to compete, we also need to cooperate. And it's very important to remember that. And one way of doing it could be, of course, to get together like this and have discussions and possibilities to reflect. But also, it could be, for instance, to write a standard or some kind of document, some kind of, I know that you've done some of that already in the UK and here too, of course. But I think it's important not to only become reactive when dealing with this. And also, last but not least, I'm doing now a research project on IOGT NTO, the temperance organization. We had a representative here, and also RFSU for sexual rights and so on. They're actually housed next door here. And what we look at these organizations because they're interesting in a sense that they're hybrids and they don't put all their financial eggs in one basket. Because you're talking a lot about, Kathy, how this one customer, doesn't have any funds anymore, or not as much. So what can you do then? There's a need to cooperate and be creative in the sense of what other types of money could we earn? How can we cooperate and so on? And also money comes with different social meaning. So there's a caution here. There has to be a discussion about what money is suitable for our organization, what money is not suitable. And it could be also a discussion about perhaps not only cooperating with private businesses, but starting different social enterprises and so on. Internally. So we find that these organizations, two organizations that we study right now, they respond to this change by acting as a hybrid, being a foundation one day, being an enterprise one day, having this clinic, and so on. So they have the different phases meeting up to face the different phases of the state. because, and that would be my final thing to say, that the state is always involved, at least in Sweden. I mean, the state is always involved. So it's just a matter of how is the state involved. There are different phases of the state, different roles. We have had a major program on the organization of markets recently at SCORE, and we see that the state could be, for instance, a big seller in the market, like in the state-owned enterprises, could be a big buyer, could be setting the rules, could be, in one sense, issuing both the competition authority and, for instance, the consumer care authority. So that's, I mean, it's not always easy to say where is the state and the role of the state, because it's very complex. So, well, those were some of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can stay up here, and I would like you to hand over that microphone.
Yeah.
We had a problem with one of the microphones, so we'll pass this one around. And you can stay, and I would also like to welcome the two of you back up. So, first of all, I would like to know if you have any reactions to each other. Maybe we should start with Kathy, who has been listening to the comments and critics. What are your reflections?
Okay, so I am particularly interested to hear about that. The idea of a commitment to quality rather than price. This is really critical. This is something that, as Susanna referred, we have produced a declaration of interdependence between the voluntary sector and the public sector to try and promote more collaboration, less competition, and longer-term support to try and move things forward. And that's a critical issue for me. So I'd be really interested to know more, because we have lowest price, above quality, and for too short a time. So, that's really interesting. That your description of the different faces of the state is really important. And unfortunately, in my experience in the UK, the government doesn't have that sophistication of understanding. So they just want the state to be not involved as much as possible. And so their definition of a healthy marketplace is one where there is as little state as possible. And that we try very hard to say you might be the customer, and you might always be the customer. And if you are, then we have to build a market around that. But you might need to be the business developer, or you might need to be the regulator to make sure that everything is fair. But you can't be all things and unaware of that. So I think we have lots to learn from each other. But yeah, so.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. What can the UK learn from Sweden, and
I think what I didn't get a chance really to talk about, because I was rambling, is this edition that we have now with experiment on social impact bonds is it's adding a third party into what we described as a customer, seller, or state and a voluntary sector. So it's adding a third party, and it's basically saying if you can do your very best, then somebody should be able to make some money out of that. Now, for the state, this is a chance to avoid paying altogether, unless and until 3 years, 5 years down the line, the voluntary sector has done its job, and then the taxpayer owes a massive bill to somebody who put in the money. So it is an incredibly high risk, from my perspective, way of trying to plug a current hole in finance. But they're not working. It's the bottom line. So several of the social impact bonds that have been tried in the UK have collapsed. Also, the Rikers Island bond in New York, that has completed. It had the same issue as I described from the drug treatment pilots, payment by results. So the program that was delivered under Goldman Sachs money with Michael Bloomberg's charity backup, failed to achieve anywhere near the same outcomes as everywhere else that the same program has been delivered. So it was worse under a social impact bond than it was in everywhere else the program was delivered. But we're told that that was a success because the state paid no money. So Goldman Sachs lost they lost some. Michael Bloomberg's charity lost a lot. So it depends what you care about. If you care about trying to minimize the state spending, then maybe...
But are you saying that that was because of the social impact bonds or despite them?
Well, I think that example and our pilots in the drug treatment sector, what they lead to, if you're curious about the impact of payment by results on practice, is a need to unpick how a program gets worse in its outcomes from by the imposition of payment by outcomes mechanism, because they don't have an answer to that yet. It's just started to appear as a pattern. But so it doesn't mean that nobody gets a successful outcome. It means that fewer people are getting a successful outcome, and we have to answer the question of why that is. Were all the staff and practitioners so distracted by the complexity of the social impact bond, which and in many cases they are very complicated? Were they distracted by all the monitoring and not spending enough time on the people? We don't know. I don't have the answer to it, but this is a first... sorry, I thought you were... sort of like... this is a first wave of evaluations about what the impact on practice might be of payment by results. And so we have to explore further, I think.
I mean, it's always sad when things doesn't work out the way it was planned, but I still think one of the point with the social impact bond system, one of the core strength is that now probably a process will continue or start where you will actually ask what went wrong. In a public equivalent, we have seen in many cases that you just keep on pushing money into things that doesn't work either, and that's the big problem. You don't stop and ask what we do to make this better. And if you have this kind of system where you also have private money in it, I mean, there are very seldom private investors continue to invest in a system that doesn't work. So, I mean, it will solve itself eventually during time, because I do think they will find ways to make the system work better. And I also think it's really important to find ways to attract more capital to these sectors, because they can make a difference. And in that process, there must be this dialogue on how to make it better. And then I would like to add 2 comments about the Nacka experience, where they set the price and then you compete with quality, is that they also set the price in that particular municipality in cooperation with the providers, so they have knowledge about what the costs are and what the reasonable costs are, so that you don't buy services that have too low quality or some kind of interventions. So it's really important to design the system and have faith in the system and do the system right, and also have faith in that it takes time. It is a process to make these things better, and it won't happen overnight, and we won't find a perfect system. But and also the next comment is that you must look in what kind of contracts you write. I mean, there's this concept about the black box contract, where you set a goal and then it's up to the providers of that particular service to deliver whatever solution they find suitable in that contract, and the state just does not regulate very closely or intensely what that services should be and how it's designed. In Sweden today, we have a big problem about when they say as something has been put to competition, but still everyone is regulated very closely and detailed in what you should do. Well, if you look at labor market, services, for instance, it can be stipulated in the contract that every person should write their personal letter once again, and it doesn't matter if that person have write 5, 6, 7 or 8 letters before.
It's true that it needs to be evaluated, and you need to have a proper look at many cases, not just one success case, or if you're on the other side, one failure. You need to look at more cases to learn, as always. But I think there is a risk that it could be once more creaming, but on another level, just picking the cherries, because if you want to do an investment, you want to, of course, lower your own risk and so on. Not always, of course, but I see a risk that if we want to accommodate this with a market solution, it could be the state or us all paying in the end anyway, because there will be gaps. I've written about responsibility gaps in the organization of responsibility in markets, that if responsibility is for sale, and somebody has to be there to pick up the bill, well, we can all imagine that there will be gaps, things that will not attract interest because they're so difficult to manage and so on. So who will then step in to take care of that kind of challenge?
Yeah, Lee first and then Kathy.
I think when you look at labor market incentives, for instance, or play programs for those people who also have a high risk of long-term employment or a history that takes a lot of care to work with, you can regulate that in the way you make the system. If it's a public system, I mean, you can say that it's forbidden to providers to not accept specific individuals, for instance. That's what they have done in Australia, for instance, when there is a pay per result program, but you can't refuse anyone entry, and I think that's a good way to solve that kind of problem. If it does emerge such issues in a completely private finance project, I think that's a less of a problem, because if you take one part of it, I mean, if you you can't take the whole bunch of civil incentives and make a social bond out of it, but if you can pick some of them and they still are profitable and you get a return and it gets more money into the organizations, that will still ease the burden for the other projects in that civil society as a whole. So I do think it can also channel resources and make it easier to focus on the other incentives as well, even if they are not attracting capital in the same way or in the same even if projects are attracting capital in different ways and different amounts. I still think it will help those most in need, because you can channel other resources there.
I think my only comment is that this may be different in Sweden, I don't know. But in England, if you actually look at the voluntary and community sector and their balance sheet as a sector, then they are not undercapitalised at all. We are actually very asset rich, but usually in property assets. So the challenge for the voluntary and community sector is always about revenue. It's not about capital. So what seemed to happen to me, it happened to me in 2008 when our private sector and our public sector went into, and our private households all went into anaphylactic shock at the level of debt that we were all in. They look at the voluntary sector, which overall is in the black and very highly capitalised, and instead of saying, what can we learn from you, they looked at us and said, wow, you seem to have very little loan finance. From the commercial sector and from the public sector, they said, oh, you look cheap. Maybe you could do what we can't afford to do anymore. And instead of, I don't recognise from within the voluntary sector the idea that we didn't have enough capital investment. People have told us that from a sector which is up to its eyeballs in debt. What we have in the voluntary sector as a way of raising finance and assets is gift. And I agree that we need to redistribute funds to the organisations that can make the real difference, but we don't have to accept that that's done by loan or only by government spending. I would love to see some of the organisations who are up for loan finance risk to the voluntary sector just say, why don't I give it to you and see what happens? Because money given as a gift is a unilateral transaction. It's completely different and it has a completely different impact. And I can give examples where gift in my sector completely subverts the property market and the pricing systems that operate. It can subvert the labour cost market, because people give their time for free. What you can't do is expect people to give their time for free in a monetized market. That's, you know, so we should be protecting, preserving and rediscovering the power of gift and our ability to use it in very radical economic ways. But we've been looked at as if we're old-fashioned, unaccountable, amateur and undercapitalized, and I think it's the wrong analysis of the voluntary sector. There's always something we can do better, but I don't think we can do better at being commercial in the commercial sector.
Thank you. I have one final. We have just a few more minutes, but it seems like Kathy is pretty negative towards this payment by results, and Lee is pretty positive. So you, as the researcher, would you say, is this because this is not equally good for companies or for non-profits, or how would you analyze that?
I would say from what I've seen in the different sectors and different cases, that it's always difficult, very, very difficult to measure, and very, very difficult to attribute outcomes and so on. And it gets more tricky the more complex the situation is. And I think the important thing to ponder about is, do we have time, do we have patience for politics nowadays? I mean, because whenever, I think that is, you know, a core question for a democracy. Do we have time to sit down and talk about these messy issues? Or do we need to reduce everything, you know, and quantify everything and so on? There's, I think, a very much hope that could make us better, more efficient, professional, like I said. But I think it's also a threat to us if we don't find time and energy for that. I'm just thinking of in more general terms, for instance, the political parties and young people getting involved with only one issue at a time, for instance. So I mean, it's more of a general societal trend, perhaps a change. I think it explains a bit why it looks like this right now.
Thank you very much. We actually have a couple of more minutes, so I will give you the chance to. We will not have time for questions from the audience, but we will have time afterwards. And as you said, we need to take time to sit down and discuss this. So I don't want to do the discussion in 1 minute. But please stay, have some more fruit, and discuss with the audience. And I know there's a lot of competence in the audience as well, as you saw on the list of participants that I sent out. But I would give you the chance for a last comment, both of you as well.
Can I go and get my thing, because there's a quote I want to read, and it will do
it
perfectly.
Okay.
This is, I don't know whether other people have read Edgar Kahn. He's an American economist. And a few years ago, he wrote an open letter to the voluntary sector. And I know it will get sent out afterwards, but this is, so you might recognize this. Markets driven by monetary exchanges cannot put supply and demand together to rebuild core economy, by which he means relationships where nobody is paid for doing what they do. Family, community, faith. The core economy is what we do for each other without any being paid for it at all. So, markets driven by monetary exchanges cannot put, simply put, supply and demand together to rebuild the core economy because of the way that market price defines value. If quantity is scarce compared to demand, then market value is high. The opposite applies. If supply is abundant, then value goes down. We say something is dirt cheap or worthless if it is abundant. That definition of value devalues those very universal capacities that enabled our species to survive and to evolve. Our ability to care for each other, to come to each other's rescue, to learn from each other, to stand up for what's right and oppose what is wrong. In market terms, those capacities, if abundant, are worthless. In terms of rebuilding the core economy, those values are literally priceless.
Yeah, I still need to bounce back, I think, to the first things I started with, and that's the role of the state and how it's changing. And I really feel that the demand of social centers is the social work is very high in Sweden, and we can't meet it with the state only. And both the private providers and the civil sector has a really important role to share that. And in terms of finding a way forward, we also need to be innovative and find ways to work better. And payment by results and social impact bonds, perhaps as a part of it, could be a really important way forward.
So thank you very much, and a big applause for the panel. And as a token of our appreciation, a small symbolic gift for you. And especially, yes, without. Especially thank you to Kathy, who has come all the way from London today, and I hope you will have a lovely day in Stockholm exploring it today. So thank you. The next seminar will be in the beginning of December, and please check on our webpage, morgonforum.se, to see when and where. Thank you.